Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Into the Kinoverse. I'm your host, Pure Kino, and we are back with another Better Call Saul log. Today we're looking at the third episode of Season 1, Nacho. Now, the teaser for this episode takes place in 1992, so this is back during the Slippin' Jimmy days. Chuck goes back to Chicago to visit Jimmy. There's a funny scene where he has to put his, keys and phone and stuff into this little cubby, because he's going into the jail. He can't bring that with him. And that, of course, mirrors what Jimmy has to do when he's locking up his phone. This is, of course, long before Chuck's illness. He's still with his wife, Rebecca, at this point, and he's still a functioning lawyer, so he doesn't have any of his symptoms yet. But the reason he's there is because Jimmy is in jail. We're not told what he did specifically. We know it involves a Chicago sunroof. We'll get the full details of what he did later this season, but for now, we just know that Jimmy's in trouble. He might be charged as a sex offender, and he needs Chuck's help to get him out of prison. But Chuck obviously is disappointed with Jimmy. It's heavily implied that this is not the first time Jimmy's in trouble. They have a very difficult relationship. Jimmy is still in his Slippin' Jimmy con man era during this point. And Chuck agrees to help get him out of jail, but only if he agrees to change his ways, which he does. Now we leave it on there, but we're seeing kind of the beginnings of Chuck and Jimmy's relationship in Better Call Saul. Next, from there we move on back to the main timeline, and Jimmy is feeling very anxious. This takes place the night after Nacho talked with him about robbing the Kettlemans. Jimmy, doesn't want them to do that, so he calls Kim, who is working for the Kettlemans because the Kettlemans went to HHM to be their lawyers. And he's kind of hinting that they might get kidnapped. He doesn't want to say outright because obviously you don't want to rat on someone in the cartel. But he's trying to hint to her that something might happen to them. And she, of course, is weirded out by this. She's like, do you know something? But he doesn't want to admit it there. Real quick aside on this situation, I wanted to talk about the relationship between Kim and Jimmy. I'm watching these episodes with my wife. We're rewatching them, and she had a question about their relationship. Are they together? Why is he calling her? Anything like this? And it's never explicitly stated throughout the series, but we kind of get hints that Jimmy and Kim were there. I mean, they're obviously very good friends, but there's hints that, they probably had a casual relationship. Maybe they slept together here and there. They're definitely not in a committed relationship at this point in the series. But the fact that when he calls her, she thinks he's calling to talk dirty to her implies that they have something of a kind of intimate relationship. Again, it's probably not committed or a serious thing, but it hints that they might have had some sort of casual relationship from their mailroom days before this. But regardless, from there, we move on to Jimmy going to call the Kettlemans. He has this ridiculous roll of not toilet paper. It's like a roll of paper towels, the little cone part. And he's talking into it to make his voice sound distorted. But when he calls the Kettlemans to warn them, they can't understand what he's saying. So eventually he just drops it and tells them that they're in danger and hangs up. They go to look outside and see a parked van outside watching them, and they're obviously freaked out by that. The next morning, Jimmy is going to the courthouse doing his usual job when he hears from Kim that the Kettlemans are missing. So he rushes to go over there because he thinks something went wrong, but he gets into an argument with Mike because he doesn't have the stickers, and he also doesn't have any money to pay Mike, which is kind of sad he didn't have $9, but regardless, he hits the button to let himself out, and obviously that gets on Mike's nerve that he just essentially walked through there illegally. But Jimmy rushes over to the house and finds that the Kettlemans have been kidnapped. Their house is ransacked, it's a mess, the door is open, and they have no idea what's going on here. So Jimmy obviously thinks that Nacho's behind this. He goes to a payphone to call Nacho. He calls a whole bunch of times. Eventually the police show up and arrest him. They know he was calling the phone number, but they didn't know why. And by the way, I mentioned I put this in text in the last Better Call Saul log, but if you call the number that Nacho wrote on the box of matches for Jimmy, it will play that message where he's like, it's not just voicemail, leave it. So that it actually does work. And I like that they went through the trouble of setting up something like that, since the number is so prominent in the episode. they just tempt people to want to call it. But they bring him to Nacho because Nacho says that he's his lawyer. Jimmy tries to tell Nacho to let the family go, but Nacho reveals that he didn't kidnap them. He was planning on robbing them and he was watching them, but when he left, they were still fine. So he wasn't behind this, but he blames Jimmy for it. He thinks that Jimmy set him up because he's the only person he told, which he's technically right about that. I mean, Jimmy is the cause of this whole situation when he told the Kettlemans, but he warns them that if the police go poking in to his business because of this, they're going to kill Jimmy. So Jimmy's under a lot of stress to get him off here or else he's going to die. So he tries to tell the police. Kim suggests that they take them back to the house in order to convince Jimmy to help get the Kettlemans out, which I found the situation weird. I don't know why the police are listening to Kim. She's the victim's attorney, but I mean, I guess in the absence of any other family members, I guess she's kind of serving as a next of kin type role, but I don't really understand what she has to do with this. Like, she represents them criminally in their case, but I don't know why they would listen to her about their investigation. And I also don't understand what they wanted Jimmy to do in the situation. Like, yeah, they want the family back, I get that, but Jimmy is his lawyer, right? Even if he knew where they were, I don't think he could give that information because that's incriminating Nacho. In fact, Kim has the exact same line later when Jimmy asks her to help them find the Kettlemans because he convinces her that the Kettlemans kidnapped themselves. She says that she can't do that because it would be incriminating them because they ran away from their crime or whatever. But I'm like, isn't that exactly what they're asking Jimmy to do? Again, I'm not a legal expert, and Kim has a line where she's like, you don't have to stand behind attorney-client privilege in this case, so maybe there is an exception, but I found it kind of weird, again, that they were, like, I don't know what they wanted Jimmy to do. He has to support his client, because if they gave the Kettlemans back, wouldn't that be giving evidence against Nacho if he did do it? But anyway, regardless, he tries to tell them that the Kettlemans kidnapped themselves. They don't believe him. He goes back to the courthouse. He tries to get in, but Mike won't let him through, because, obviously he ran out without paying before. I kind of don't know what the proper situation is in this case, because, like, he does need to go back to the courthouse because he is the lawyer, but I mean, presumably he should just pay a fine or something. I don't think Mike can literally just ban him from the premises. I mean, he is just a toll booth operator, like, no disrespect, but anyway, Jimmy doesn't take kindly to that. He just tries to walk through, and then he puts a finger on Mike, and then Mike just completely demolishes him. Like, it's not even close. He knocks him to the ground. And because Jimmy put a finger on him, the police get Mike to agree to press charges, again, hoping to, I guess, blackmail Jimmy into helping them against his client, which I'm pretty sure is illegal. I don't think, again, that they can force him to go against his client's wishes. Like, again, that seems like a weird thing of justice they're trying to do here. Regardless, though, Mike refuses after he hears the story. One, because he believes Jimmy, but two, I also think, like, he has a look on his face in the situation where it kind of seems like he doesn't like these cops. These cops kind of seem like bullies, and I think they remind him of his past as a police officer, which we'll talk about that in a future episode coming up here. But I think it's a personal thing too. But regardless, Mike tells Jimmy that, like, yeah, he thinks the Kettlemans kidnapped themselves, but he gives him the advice that they probably didn't run far away. And he tells him a story about when he was on the job in Philadelphia, how during one of the Super Bowls, a bookie ran away, but he was actually just living a few doors down in an abandoned house. So that gives Jimmy an idea of where to look for the Kettlemans. Now, I was doing a little research about what Super Bowl he's talking about here. He says it was the Cowboys versus the Steelers, and there's actually 3 Super Bowls in which the Cowboys faced the Steelers, 2 in the 1970s and then 1 in 1996. It seems like any of those could have been the case because Mike was on the force for 30 years before this episode takes place in 2002. So he could have been on the job when those happened in the 70s, but he would have been really new to the job back then. So I don't think he would have been investigating that. I think probably he's talking about the one in 1996, Super Bowl XXX. Again, not an important detail, but I was trying to figure out the timeline of which Super Bowl it would be. But regardless, Jimmy goes to the Kettlemans' house and he walks through their backyard into the desert, walks for a long time. And then he eventually finds the Kettlemans camped out there. They're singing songs and stuff. I really don't know what the Kettlemans' plan was in this situation. Like, I don't know how they were planning to get away from the cops here. Like, presumably they would have to go back home eventually. And I don't know what they would tell them in that situation. They'll be like, "Oh, I guess the kidnappers let us go," or whatever. They're not the brightest bulbs, But regardless, Jimmy confronts them and tells them that they have to go. Betsy refuses, and they get into a little scuffle over a duffel bag, which eventually rips open, and the $1.5 million that they presumably stole is in there. So this really confirms their guilt, and that's where the episode ends, obviously. Now, there's some trivia in this episode I wanted to go over. Some of these I'm pulling from the Wikipedia page. I didn't notice all this stuff originally, but apparently on the payphone when Jimmy is talking, or when he's calling Nacho, there's a mark in there that looks like it might have been made from Jesse Pinkman. It matches some graffiti that we later see in Jesse's house. Now, we obviously are not going to meet Jesse for a long time in Better Call Saul, but in 2002, when this episode takes place, he would have been about 18 years old. So it's presumable that he could have tagged this, this payphone. He was definitely like a kid, like a punk kid who did stuff like this in addition to selling drugs and doing drugs and stuff like that. Now, also at the beginning of this episode, when Jimmy's in jail and Chuck walks in, Jimmy quotes, "Here's Johnny," which is a reference to the Johnny Carson intro. And he also does the same thing at the end when he enters the tent. But the "Here's Johnny" that he does at the end of the tent is obviously a reference to The Shining. I knew about The Shining one. I actually didn't know that "Here's Johnny" came from Johnny Carson, because that's a little bit before my time. But cool that they use that throughout the episode. It's a cool that they weaved it through there. And then finally, when Jimmy's being taken down by the police, he says that he has bad knees. We do know that from Breaking Bad. When in the Better Call Saul episode, he tells them that he has bad knees in the desert. And we can kind of get the idea that he has bad knees because of all of his Slippin' Jimmy scams that he did back in the day. Like, he admitted that falling like that, hurts. Like, even though it doesn't break anything, he probably damaged his knees during that time. But regardless, that is the episode. And now it's time for the question of the day, or question of the episode. And this question comes from Rogue Brit Gravy 1, and this is from the comments section of YouTube on the last Better Call Saul log. But he asks, "What is your favorite episode of Better Call Saul of the entire show?" Now, I don't want to give it away right now because we're going to get to it in a little bit, but I'll give it away anyway. Who cares? It is the episode 5-0 of season 1, so we are going to be covering that. I don't want to get into the whole detail of why I love that episode so much. We'll get into that more when I cover the episode, but essentially, Mike's episode from season 1 is my absolute favorite throughout the entire series. I think is a masterclass of acting. I think it's the best character writing that they've ever done. I think it's just great. So yeah, episode 5-0 of the first season. But that is it for the episode. Thank you guys so much for listening to this, and stay tuned for the next Better Call Saul log coming soon. Here's Kino. Matt Joyce, Uncle Mike, Sam Cedarland, Celery Man, Countess von Zarevich, Admiral, Neil Varma, and Juan Jaramillo.